What I do know, and I can tell you about Aleppo, is that Russia was extremely reluctant to get involved in combat in Syria. The war began in 2011 when the United States landed Central Intelligence operatives to begin coordinating with Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. And we have been unwavering supporters of Al-Qaeda since before the war formally began. We are supporters of Al-Qaeda today, where they're bottled up in Idlib province. The CIA supplied them under secret Operation Timber Sycamore. We gave them all of their anti-tank weapons, all of their anti-air missiles. And Al-Qaeda has always been our proxy force on the ground. They, together with ISIS, have carried out the mission of the United States, together with a great number of affiliates that really are kind of interchangeable. You have the Free Syrian Army. Soldiers move from ISIS to Al-Qaeda to Free Syrian Army rather fluidly. And so we started that war, but the United States has a strategic policy of using proxies to engage in war. And our objective was overthrow the legitimate government of Syria. And in order to do that, we employed proxy soldiers who were the most vile of all terrorists. Something very similar is happening right now in Ukraine. But going back to Aleppo, the Syrian army, together with Hezbollah, which was very effective, there were some troops that were organized by Iran also, but it was pretty much a Syrian show, certainly directed by Syrian generals. And they had fought this bitter urban combat, very brutal, very deadly. And they had fought it for 4 years before Russia ever joined the battle. So after 4 years, the city of Aleppo had enormous destruction. And at that point, the Russians, at the invitation of the legitimate government of Syria, entered the war. But unlike many of the media reports, they did not enter the war as a ground force. Now, they had some small ground forces. They had military police. They had a few artillery units, a few special operations people, and they had quite a number of advisors and that sort of thing. But they were not a significant ground force. On the other hand, they were a significant and very effective air force that supplemented the Syrian Air Force. But it really was just the last year of the war, the battle for Aleppo, just the last year that they entered, and their air power was very effective. And by this time, the Syrians had pretty well worn down the terrorist forces, and the Russian assistance was able to tip the balance, and Aleppo was the grand victory of the entire Syrian war. But to blame the Russians for the massive destruction that took place within Aleppo, it's bizarre, because they were not there. They were not even present when this happened. So this is simply another part of the propaganda narrative, which has been very effective for the West, demonizing Russia. and making claims that have no substance, but people don't remember the history of these things. They're rather complex. So no, Russia was not in any respect responsible for the massive destruction of the city of Aleppo.
How would you contrast the methods of warfare followed by Russia as opposed to the U.S. and allied forces in Syria?
Well, first of all, the American involvement, the United States war against Syria is a war of aggression. We put the Central Intelligence, it's a highly secretive CIA Special Activities Center. These are kind of the James Bond guys of the Central Intelligence Agency. Total Machiavellian. They will do anything. It's no holds barred with these guys. We sent them in and we started the war in Syria. The war didn't exist until we sent the CIA to coordinate with Al-Qaeda elements. So we began the war, and we were not invited into Syria. In fact, the United States has seized two significant parts of Syria. One is a very major part. The Euphrates River bisects, or doesn't bisect, it carves off about a third of the northern part of Syria. The United States invaded that portion. We actually put troops on the ground, illegal against any standard international law of war. It was just a seizure, and this was something that was referred to by John Kerry, who was then the Secretary of State, and he was frustrated at the tremendous victory by the Syrian armed forces against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And he said, well, we probably need to move to Plan B. He didn't announce what Plan B was, but it unfolded over time. Plan B was the American seizure of that northern portion of Syria. The importance of taking that part of Syria is that it is the breadbasket for all of the Syrian people. That is where the wheat, Syria actually had a significant wheat surplus, and the people were very well fed in Syria before the war. We wanted to take the wheat away to cause famine among the Syrian people. The other thing we were able to do is to seize the major part of the oil and natural gas fields. Those also were produced in that northern portion beyond the Euphrates River. And the idea was that by stealing the oil and the gas, we would be able to shut down the transportation system. And at the same time, during the Syrian winters, we could freeze to death the Syrian civilian population, which in many cases were living in rubble, where these terrorist armies with mechanized divisions had attacked and just totally destroyed these cities and left people just living in little pockets of rubble. We wanted to starve and we wanted to freeze to death the people of Syria, and that was Plan B. Now, we became frustrated at a certain point that somehow these Syrians, these darn Syrians, it's a tiny little country, and why are these people resilient? They're fighting against 2/3 of the entire military and industrial force of the world. How can a nation of 23 million people possibly withstand this for over a decade? And so we decided we had to take action or we were going to totally lose Syria. And so the US Congress imposed the Caesar sanctions. The Caesar sanctions were the most brutal sanctions ever imposed on any nation. I mean, during the Second World War, sanctions were not nearly as strict as they were on Syria. We weren't at war with Syria, and yet we had a naval blockade around the country. We devalued their currency through the SWIFT system for international payments, making it impossible for them to purchase medications. So you had Syrian women who would contract breast cancer, just like we have here in this country. But instead of here in this country, where breast cancer has become relatively treatable, we cut off the medical supplies so that the women in Syria would die of breast cancer because they could not get the medications because we slammed their dollars through the SWIFT system. One of the last things that we did, and the evidence is vague on it, but there was a mysterious explosion in the harbor in Lebanon, and it was a massive explosion of a shipload of ammonium nitrate fertilizer. It killed hundreds of Lebanese people. It wounded thousands and thousands, destroyed the economy of Lebanon, and most importantly, it destroyed the banking system of Lebanon, which was one of the few lifelines remaining to Syria. I don't think that explosion was accidental. I think it was orchestrated, and I suspect that the Central Intelligence Agency was aware of the nation that carried out that action to destroy Beirut Harbor. But throughout, you see this Machiavellian approach where we use unlimited force and violence, and at the same time, we control the global media to where we erase all discussions of what's truly happening. So to the man, the woman in the street, they think things are fine. Everything is being done for altruistic reasons, but it's not.